The key to the success of American investment in space is a clearly articulated plan and strategy supported by the administration and Congress. Such a program will motivate the young toward excellence, support a vital industry, and earn the respect of the world.
All right. The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order and say good morning to all of you and welcome to this hearing entitled NASA Human Spaceflight, Past, Present, and Future. Where do we go from here? In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witnesses. And excuse me just okay. All right, I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I'd like to welcome everyone here today to discuss America's human space exploration program and the vision, goals, resources, hardware, and commitment that go into it. And it's hard to imagine a more qualified panel of witnesses with more personal insight and pertinent experience than the ones we have here today. I'd like to sincerely thank all of you for taking the time out of your very busy and important schedules to be here and share with this Congress and this committee your wisdom, your insight that's gained through considerable and unbelievable firsthand experience. We're truly honored to have you here. NASA's human space exploration program is fundamental to the agency's mission and identity, and it's synonymous with the image of American leadership all around the world. The Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and more recently Space Shuttle and Space Station programs have had a profound and lasting beneficial effect on our country. They're largely defined, and they have defined NASA and the spirit and the technological prowess of America in the eyes of other nations that few of us in this room can really appreciate. For the agency with a budget that consumes less than 0.5% of federal spending, and human space exploration is about 20% of that, NASA is renowned at home and around the world as certainly an American enterprise whose feats no one has been able to duplicate. To be sure, Russia was the first into space and the first to orbit a human, but after that, no other country had the commitment, resources, technical expertise, and capability to land men on the moon or to fly a reusable fleet of space planes. And we're now at a crossroad. The 30-year-old shuttle program's been retired. The International Space Station is built, and for the next several years, our country is without any domestic capability of getting American astronauts to and from our own space station. Last fall, after more than a year of protracted debates, the administration and Congress came to an agreement allowing NASA to proceed with its plan to seed development of a commercial launch industry to take crew to and from low Earth orbit, but the central tenet was agreement to build a space launch system and multi-purpose crew vehicle to ensure future capability to take astronauts into deep space. While Congress and the administration concurred on these two initiatives, there continues to be differences over resources and schedules that will guide these new programs, and with respect to deep space, we still don't have a destination, which is an important consideration. Last week, NASA announced plans to proceed with the development of a new heavy lift launch system that will enable our deep space program. Recently released proposals indicate just 2 flights over the next 10 years. If NASA doesn't move out quickly, more and more of our industrial base, skilled engineers and technicians, and hard-won capabilities are at risk of withering away. America needs leadership with a compelling vision and the strength of commitment. Our bright young engineers about to enter our workforce will likely look to disciplines other than aerospace if faced with such a protracted development cycle. I'm also concerned that we need a viable backup system to ferry astronauts to and from the International Space Station should commercial crew launch companies not be able to deliver as hoped. It's my sincere hope that NASA, commercial companies, and Congress can work through challenging technical, legal, and regulatory issues in the months and years ahead related to the commercial crew model. However, as the NASA Authorization Act of 2010 prescribed, we have to be ready to service the International Space Station if our hopes of a commercial crew industry are not realized. And just as important, the SLS and other programs begin the work of ensuring that America has an ongoing long-term exploration program. Today's witnesses are among the best and the brightest in their respect, and then certainly in their field, test pilots, astronauts, administrators, and scientists. Collectively, their years of aerospace experience may even exceed my age. I don't know who wrote that part in there. Which they're fired. Well, you know, I'm 88, and my kids tell me, "Papa, don't you hate for people to say you're 88?" And I tell them, "That sounds better than don't he look natural." Collectively, their years of aerospace, I'm afraid to read anymore, may even exceed my age, which gives me no small comfort. I want to thank them again for agreeing to testify and look forward to hearing the benefits of their wisdom and their experience. And I want to recognize Mrs. Johnson for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I want to join Chairman Hall in welcoming our witnesses. Each of you bring a unique blend of experience, expertise, and accomplishments into today's hearing, and I look forward to your testimony. I'd also like to take a moment to express my appreciation to Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Cernan for their continued service to the nation. Their past service as astronauts, including commanding Apollo moon landing missions, which is well known, but what is not so well known is their willingness to continue to serve this country, traveling to war zones and to nations around the world as goodwill ambassadors for America. When they could not be, they really could be at home enjoying life, but they are giving more time to the country. It shows the type of individuals they are. However, it also demonstrates that America's human space flight program has always been about much more than simply building rockets and space capsules and launching astronauts into space. It is also about inspiring people, both young and old. It is about providing a peaceful and positive demonstration to nations around the world of American technological preeminence. It is about developing cutting-edge technologies for our human space missions that also benefit our citizens and create new jobs. It is about motivating our young people to pursue careers in science and engineering by providing them with a challenging future that is inherent to space exploration, and it is about advancing our knowledge. This is so important for our young people, and that is something I think that we in Congress need to remember. As we debate what we want to do with our nation's human space flight program, we sometimes forget the American people are much less interested in what particular rocket NASA will be building than in why we're investing in space exploration in the first place. As I have always indicated, I think the benefits of investing in human space flight are clear and compelling, and ones that can justify making a sustained commitment to moving forward on our next step in exploration, because that is what we should be talking about, determining how much we are willing to commit on an annual basis to maintain a credible and forward-looking human space flight and exploration program, and not continually revisiting the question of whether we should have one at all. Successive Congresses and presidents from both parties have always answered that question in the affirmative. It is now time to move on. That said, I know there will be some who will say the space race is over. We won it more than 40 years ago, and supporters of human space exploration are just as capable to nostalgia. Well, I was proud of what this country had accomplished in the Apollo program, but I'm not nostalgic about that time. Instead, I support space exploration because it's about the future, not the past. And I firmly believe we're in a new, equally demanding space race, a race to inspire young people to acquire the science and engineering skills they will need to compete for the jobs for the future, a race to develop the technologies that will not only help us explore space, but also strengthen our economy and improve our quality of life back here on Earth, and a race to maintain our leadership as a space-faring nation in the face of growing competitive challenges by other nations. There will also be those who will say it's time to get the government out of space exploration. Let the private sector do it. Such a statement ignores the fact that our nation's space flight program, and NASA in total, represents one of the most effective public-private partnerships in pursuit of challenging goals that this country has never seen. The facts are clear. Almost 85% of NASA's budget already goes to the private sector to provide the hardware, software, intellectual energy, and services that help NASA push back the space frontier. And of course, there are those who will say that we should pause our human space flight program until we have a clear exploration policy so that NASA doesn't wind up building a rocket to nowhere. As the ranking member of this authorizing committee, I would only note that 3 successive NASA authorizations have directed NASA to pursue a step-by-step program of exploration beyond low Earth orbit. So whether it's called step-by-step or a flexible path exploration program, it's clear that Congress and the President have already given the necessary policy direction. The technical expertise at NASA now need to be allowed to get on with the task of developing the specific steps on that path that make the most sense. And finally, there will be those who will say times are tough. We can't afford it right now. I would respond to that. We cannot afford not to pursue a meaningful human space program. The amount of funding that will be cut will have no significant positive impact on our fiscal situation, but it will result in the loss of tens of thousands of good-paying jobs, skilled jobs in the aerospace industry. It will slow the development of advanced technologies that could wind up creating new jobs in the future, will forfeit American leadership in space, and will inevitably lead some of our best and brightest young minds to turn away from studying science and engineering. I don't think that makes sense, and I don't think most Americans will either, if presented with the facts. Mr. Chairman, I have shared this frustration at the slow pace at which NASA has been allowed to move on with the human space program authorized and funded by Congress. And I would note that 16 months ago, the committee held a similar hearing with Mr. Armstrong and Captain Cernan. At that time, Congresswoman Griffin, who was then chairwoman of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee, voiced her concerns about the viability of the administration's plans for NASA. Like our witnesses today, she stressed the need for a clear vision, a commitment to consistent, achievable goals, and budgets that are adequate for the tasks to be undertaken. Many of the issues raised by Congresswoman Griffin in the past Congress are still relevant today. As we look to this year's budget request for NASA, that said, I believe that the President's announcements last week was a very positive step, and I look forward to working with the members of Congress and the President to help ensure that the nation can sustain a human space flight program it can be proud of for decades to come. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from Texas. Yields back. If there are other members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Culberson, and Mr. Olson, the gentleman from Florida, be allowed to sit on the committee and participate in the hearing. Hearing no objections, it's so ordered. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panel of witnesses, and if I really fully introduced any of them, it'd take me the rest of the day, but we've narrowed it down to the height that we absolutely have to introduce you. You all are introduced all the time, and the first one that I'll introduce, Neil Armstrong, I read the other day where his name is the most recognized name in the world. And he says, well, that's dangerous. And I asked him what hotel he checked into and under the name John Smith. But at this time, I want to introduce this panel. Our first witness is Mr. Neil Armstrong, world-renowned for his role as commander of Apollo 11 mission, the first human to walk on the moon. Mr. Armstrong began his distinguished career as a naval aviator, flying combat missions over Korea. He spent 15 years at NASA, first as an engineer and test pilot, probing the edge of space with the X-15 when the agency was known as the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics. He also served as command pilot of Gemini 8 and commander of Apollo 11. Subsequently, he served as a NASA Deputy Associate Administrator for Aeronautics. Leaving NASA, he taught at the University of Cincinnati and has served in several corporate positions. I want to welcome Mr. Armstrong. We're not only glad to have you join us, we're honored to have you join us. And the book on it is that you have 5 minutes each of you, but I doubt seriously if there's anybody here that could even take this gavel away from me to gavel you down if you went a little over that. So I recognize you, Neil, at this time, and thank you again, personally, and for this buddy. Our second witness is Captain Eugene A. Cernan. Gene Cernan is the commander of Apollo 17. He was a naval aviator. This is kind of the day for naval aviators, I think. And after moving over to NASA, he flew on 3 missions, including pilot of Gemini 9 and commander of Apollo 17. He was the last man to walk on the moon so far. I don't ever like to hear people say, is this the last vote? You know, if they say, is this the last vote of today, that's different. He continued his service as NASA in senior management positions and played a prominent role in the Apollo-Soyuz mission. He has won a number of distinctions and has worked at the private sector since leaving the Navy and NASA. Our third witness is Dr. Maria Zuber, E.A. Griswold Professor of Geophysics and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She's participated in a number of NASA-sponsored science missions and is currently the principal investigator for the GRAIL mission that launched just 2 weeks ago. Dr. Zuber also serves as a member of the National Academy of Sciences and a fellow of the American Geophysical Union and the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dr. Zuber, it's good to have you appear before us again. Our final witness for today is Dr. Michael D. Griffin, former NASA administrator and currently eminent scholar and professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Mike is well known to many of us, having served as administrator of NASA from 2005 to 2009 and as head of the Applied Physics Laboratory at Johns Hopkins University. Previously, he held a number of positions in industry and government, and he has earned more graduate degrees than anyone I know. I'd have to take off my shoes to count the number that he had, and including a PhD in aerospace engineering. And Mike, it's good to see you, and if it'll help you any, Bart Garden, the former chairman I was ranking, highly recommended you to the president, and he was consistent in not paying any attention to either one of us. But we're very good to see you again. I now recognize Captain Cernan to present his testimony. You have written right here, Eugene Cernan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member.
No, we won't arm Mr. Armstrong. And if you fool with me, I'll turn it over to Mr. Griffin here.
I'm accustomed to being last following the letter.
Okay. All right. And I'm accustomed to making a few mistakes up here. All right. Honored to have you, Neil. Go ahead. Really. Yes. We're to go ahead and tell us what you want to
do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of offending the ranking member by talking about the past, I was informed by a gentleman in in Australia a couple of months ago of a interesting film that had been created here in the United States that I did not know about. And with your permission, sir, I would show this short film to you.
Permission is absolutely granted.
Thank you, sir. This is a confluence of divergent times and disciplines. 42 years ago, Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and this image that you see in front of you shows the last 3.5 minutes of what that trajectory looked like over the actual craters that it flew. At the same time, a new technology appeared. This was Google Earth. Some of you have observed your own house on Google Earth. There was a version of this called Google Moon, and it allowed you to investigate the moon on your own computer and go where you'd like to see. A gentleman in Georgia, astronomer by trade, took images from our most recent lunar exploring satellite, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which was launched 2 years ago with very good optics to completely map the surface of the moon with high-quality images with resolutions of 1/2 to 1 meter. The gentleman took the images from the Lunar, the LRO, the Lunar Reconnaissance Observer, and patched them together using Google Moon. Google Moon allows you to take a perspective of the picture. This picture, the image in front of you, is a perspective, but all the images taken by the satellite are vertical, straight down. So Google allows you to take a vertical image and convert it to a perspective as you see on this image. The gentleman patched together a myriad of images from different orbits of the LRO that passed over the trajectory of the Apollo 11 descent and recreated the descent in a perspective mode. The oh, okay. So what we will, the actual descent was 12.5 minutes. This is the last 3.5 minutes. It starts about 3,000 feet in altitude and continues all the way down to the surface. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Eagle looking great.
Okay. On the left side of the screen, you will see the image that was taken by the 16 millimeter movie camera located in a bracket in the right-hand window of the lunar module Eagle. And it shows the picture that has often been used in anyone who made films about what happened on Apollo 11 and the lunar descent. The right-hand picture is composed of images from LRO in the last 2 years and recreated the descent. So you see in the right-hand side of the picture an image that accurately reflects what the crew, what we in the lunar module Eagle actually saw while we were going down. So the picture on the left is a rectangle that's that's skewed at 45 degrees roughly because that's the way it was mounted in the window. And it's partly blocked by structure of the lunar module, so it has a very limited field of view. The picture on the right shows the same angular area that covered by the covered by the motion picture on the right. So you can compare the little crater on the left to the crater on the left. Let's see. That crater is the same as this crater here, and that crater is the one that's there. And you'll be able to see those comparison craters as you go down the trajectory all the way to the surface. Okay, so let's start the video.
Here go.
You'll hear the sounds of my co-pilot giving me numbers, and you'll hear ground control at Houston responding to our actions. We're descending at a rate of about 3,000 feet a minute.
35 degrees. 35 degrees. 750.
We've had
coming down to 23.
Computer warnings
700 feet, 21
rather frequently. But we're continuing on autopilot.
19.
The autopilot tells us that we are going
540 feet down
to the
30 and a 15.
The autopilot is going to land us close to the rim of that large crater. I don't want to go there. It's steep sides, and we're flying over a field of large boulders about the size of automobiles. Not a good place to land at all. We decided to go out about a mile further to the west and find a smooth and level landing spot.
Horizontal velocity.
There's more
300 feet down, 3.5.
More computer alarms,
forward.
but we're getting used to those for now.
On 1.5 down.
We see a crater coming up now on the top of the screen. It's about 30 meters across, about 100 feet, and that's not good, but there looks like some level spots beyond that are
altitude velocity light.
Are running low on fuel because we're running, we've extended our flight plan, our trajectory past the intended landing spot, but we still have about a minute of fuel left, and that is, we consider that to be adequate. That's a good-looking crater, and I want to go back there and have a look at that if I get a chance later, and in fact I did. The landing areas right ahead. It looks pretty good. There's little craters in there, but they look manageable.
5%.
So we're coming down low to the surface and starting to kick up a little dust at this point. You can see that in the left-hand side. But of course, the satellite picture on the right from 2 years ago doesn't show blowing dust.
60 seconds. Lights on. Down 2.5.
Now we're getting down very low to the surface. Moving dust is increasing.
40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust.
There you see the shadow of our lunar landing leg in the bottom of our spacecraft approaching the surface.
4 forward, drift into the right.
And
down a half.
It's
30 seconds. Forward, drift. Ready? Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
So
yay!
What you see here, Mr. Chairman, is one of the actual vertical pictures taken of the spot where we landed. And of course, what you see is the descent stage of the Eagle. It contains the rocket engine that we used for the descent, the fuel for that engine, and the landing legs and some of our scientific equipment, which we left behind on the moon. A view into history through the views of modern technology. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All those up here helped you land it just now. And if you have further, I won't count that against your 5 minutes if you have anything else you want to tell us.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Hall, Ranking Member Johnson, members of the committee. Thank you so much for giving me the invitation and the opportunity to present my perspective on the state of the American human space exploration efforts. This past year has been frustrating for NASA observers as they tried to understand NASA's plans and progress. The NASA leadership enthusiastically assured the American people that the agency was indeed embarking on an exciting new age of discovery in the cosmos. But the realities of the termination of the shuttle program, the cancellation of the existing launching rocket and spacecraft programs, the layoffs of thousands of aerospace workers, the outlook for American space activity throughout the next decade was difficult to reconcile with the agency assertions. After this initial proposed cancellation of Constellation Ares launchers and Orion and Altair spacecraft early last year, this committee and other representatives, senators, and concerned citizens worked diligently to find alternatives to the now missing essential elements of the U.S. space strategy. You were resolute in modifying the administration's proposed 5-year study of heavy lift rockets and changed to the immediate initiation of its design and construction. And you observed the metamorphosis of the canceled Orion first into a ill-conceived crew rescue vehicle and thereafter into a potentially very useful multi-purpose crew vehicle. So much has been accomplished. But NASA, hobbled by cumbrous limitations, has been unable to articulate a master plan that excites the imagination and provides a semblance of predictability to the aerospace industry. We will have no American access to, nor return from, low Earth orbit and the International Space Station for an unpredictable time in the future. For a country that has invested so much for so long to achieve a leadership position in space exploration and exploitation, this condition is viewed by many as lamentably embarrassing and unacceptable. The severe reductions in space activity have caused substantial erosion in many critical technical areas and are creating negative economies of scale cost increases throughout the aerospace industry. Most importantly, public policy must be guided by the recognition that we live in a technology-driven world where progress is rapid and unstoppable. Our choices are to lead, try to keep up, or get out of the way. A lead, however earnestly and expensively won, once lost, is very difficult and expensive to regain. The key to the success of American investment in space is a clearly articulated plan and strategy supported by the administration and Congress and implemented with the consistency or all the consistency that the vagaries of the budget will allow. Such a program will motivate the young toward excellence, support a vital industry, and earn the respect of the world. Some significant progress has been achieved during the past year. However, NASA, with insufficient resources, continues to try to fulfill the directives of the administration and the mandates of the Congress, and the result is a fractious process that satisfies neither. The absence of a comprehensive plan that is understood and supported by government, industry, academia, and society as a whole frustrates everyone. NASA itself, riven with conflicting forces and the dashed hopes of canceled programs, must find ways of restoring hope and confidence to a confused and disconsolate workforce. The reality that there is no requirement for a NASA spacecraft commander for the foreseeable future is obvious and painful to all who have justifiably taken great pride in NASA's wondrous spaceflight achievements of the past half-century. Winston Churchill famously stated, "Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all the alternatives." And in spaceflight, we're in the process of exhausting alternatives. I'm hopeful that in the near future we'll be doing the right thing. And I thank the committee very much for giving me this opportunity to thank you for all you do to advance American spaceflight. Thank you.
And we thank you very much, each one of us up here. I can't help but tell the story about the 25th anniversary when you were invited to the White House by Mr. Clinton and he left a chair open for you. Didn't expect you there, but you showed up. And he was kidding you about not speaking. You got the microphone, you walked over there and you said, "The parrot is the only bird in the world that can talk and speak, and I can do both." He handed it back to him and the crowd went wild. Thank you again. All right, at this time we really recognize Eugene Cernan to be presenting his testimony. Gene, good to have you.
Thank you. And to readdress the past, if I may, because I believe it important to go back in time and retrace our path through history to the day from which we were destined to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. And as we now look to the future, I consider the past extremely vital so as to fully understand what is required to become, once again, the unchallenged leader in a world of space exploration. And I can only assume, Mr. Chairman, you gave me the same courtesy you gave Neil and not count my first paragraph or two.
Is there objections? Chair hears none.
Lest we forget, Mr. Chairman, it was a bold and courageous president over a half-century ago who started us on a journey to the stars, a journey from which America never looked back, and a journey that challenged the American people at every crossroad to do what most at the time thought impossible. It was a challenge that came in what we remember as the terrible 60s, a time when our nation was shackled with civil strife, campus unrest, and the beginning of what became a very, very unpopular war. And perhaps foremost, it was a challenge to the then Soviet Union's dominance in space. To meet that challenge required all the dedication and personal commitment our nation could muster. And it was not going to be easy, but hard, and did require sacrifice, just as John F. Kennedy said it would. However, being second best was unacceptable then, and being just good today is never going to be good enough for the American people. JFK did not just challenge us to go to the moon. He believed it was time to take a leading role in space, a role he thought might well hold to the future of our nation on Earth. So we built upon the uncertainty of Mercury, fabricated Gemini, the bridge to Apollo, and then realized the dream of mankind for eons of time, when over 40 years ago we were able to call the moon our home. But we did not quit there. Before the end of Apollo in 1972, when those quote, most recent steps were taken. Skylab, man's first orbiting laboratory, was already ready to fly. The space shuttle, perhaps the most capable flying machine ever designed, built, and flown by man, was already on the drawing boards. And today, the International Space Station, the assembly of which may well go down in history as man's greatest engineering accomplishment of all time, circles the globe some 14 times a day, every day, all in keeping with JFK's challenge to go to the moon, and I quote, and do the other things, unquote. Along the way, thousands of young Americans who, inspired by what was happening around them, became doctors, engineers, teachers, scientists, and even university presidents. A stimulus for education unparalleled in our history. The above constituted a logical progression with the purpose of achieving and then maintaining our position as the world's leader in space exploration. And with it came the development of technology which allowed us to satisfy mankind's insatiable quest for knowledge. All that on the ocean on which we set sail a half a century ago. For 50 years, Mr. Chairman, we were caught up in the inertia of growth, where each day brought new revelations about the unknown. Our curiosity was overwhelmed with more questions than answers. However, today we are on a path of decay. We are seeing the book closed on 5 decades of accomplishment as the leader in human space exploration. As unimaginable as it seems, we have now come full circle and ceded our leadership role in space back to the same country, albeit by a different name, that spurred our challenge 5 decades ago. What measures are needed to reverse this inertia of today? Based upon history, the long-term solution appears obvious. One only has to look back and learn from history to understand what it will take to once again be the world's leading spacefaring nation. We need an administration that believes in and understands the importance of America's commitment to regaining its preeminence in space. An administration which provides us with a leader who will once again be bold, just as JFK was, and challenge our people to do what history has now told us is possible. We must have a forward-looking independent NASA who can advise the President, manage far-reaching programs, and work with a bipartisan Congress in moving forward with a space program that benefits all Americans. And a NASA that realizes the importance of looking back in history, learning from our mistakes, and building upon the successful culture of a government-private industry partnership that has endured throughout the life of our space program, developing safe and cost-effective space exploration systems. The short-term solution is far more complex. In light of NASA and the present administration's now obvious to me anyway, agenda to dismantle a space program that has been 5 decades in the making. First on this agenda was to cancel Constellation, a $10 billion investment, 5 years in development. Embedded in Constellation architecture was a culture of a long-range building block that could not only service the ISS, extend the life of Hubble, provide national security, but additionally would be capable of carrying us back to the moon and on to Mars. To replace Constellation was a mission to nowhere, which had no near or long-term goals, timetable, specific destination, and no direction for human spaceflight. And nowhere were there any specific plans for the design and building of hardware should any part of this agenda be overridden by Congress. Then came a decision to subsidize commercial space to, and I quote, whatever extent it might take to make it successful, unquote. A program that appears to have little or no transparency or NASA insight or oversight into existing problems or those that past experience has told us will crop up in the future. My thoughts on commercial space claims are well known. I stand behind my assertion that it will be near the end of the decade before these new entrants will be able to place a human safely and cost-effectively in Earth orbit. Now we have the termination of the space shuttle with, until recently, nothing on the administration's horizon to replace it. It wasn't but a few months ago that we had the most capable, operationally proven launch vehicle far into the future, giving us unprecedented personal and payload access to low Earth orbit. Additionally, the shuttle had the potential of being a catalyst for the assembly and return to Earth of deep space missions, resulting in weight and performance advantages. Even if not into the future plans to be the primary lift to low Earth orbit, the shuttle certainly provided us with a versatile and redundant operational system. Isn't it ironic, Mr. Chairman, that we find ourselves today with no capability to access the Earth, the ISS? I believe the shuttle retirement to be a poorly thought out and premature decision. I take no solace in the failure of the last Soyuz booster, but if one examines the recent letter from Dr. Christopher Kraft, the former head of the Johnson Space Center, concerning a letter to the NASA administrator concerning this and other problematic contingencies, serious questions could be asked. This letter requested only that the decision on shuttle retirement be reconsidered in light of the fact that there was nothing to take its place for some indeterminate time in the future. Mr. Chairman, we stand here today at a crossroads. If we abdicate our leadership in space today, and not only is human spaceflight and space exploration at risk, but I believe the future of this country and thus the future of our children and grandchildren as well. Now is the time for wiser heads in Congress of the United States to prevail. Now is the time to override the administration's pledge to mediocrity. Now is the time to be bold, innovative, and wise in how we invest in the future of America. Now is the time to reestablish our nation's commitment to excellence. Mr. Chairman, Ms. Johnson, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just about space. It's about the country. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and pay no attention to the empty chairs here, because we're at a time now when all of us have extra. Don't let it indicate the lack of interest on anybody's part, but all have other things to do. We're kind of in a hard situation here right now. Everything is being taken down. They will be given copies of your testimony and the questions and your answers. At this time, I recognize Dr. Zuber for her statement.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today to provide perspectives on the future of human spaceflight. My mission, GRAIL, which is on its way to the moon, is the first NASA planetary mission which has an imaging experiment with no scientific purpose. It is to be used solely for education, targeted at middle school students. As an educator and a proud participant in NASA's robotic exploration program, I am an enthusiastic supporter of human space exploration. I focus on a subset of the testimony which addresses the questions that were asked me. There are two attributes that are necessary for the implementation of a human spaceflight program. First, the program must be managed responsibly, with a balance between infusion of new technology and a sensible risk and cost profile. Unfortunately, NASA's advanced technology work has been cut back, and it's not clear how the agency will be able to unfold new technologies without a more concentrated effort to develop them. Off-the-shelf technology will not meet all future needs, and significant advances will be required if costs are to be managed. Second, a balanced program of science and technology is necessary. The thought that it's possible to cut out major parts of an industry or a scientific enterprise and that people will return at some undefined point in the future is unsound. There should be a firewall between the human and robotic parts of the space exploration program. Job one in the next phase of human spaceflight is to develop reliable, routine access to low Earth orbit. But NASA should be doing the technologically challenging task, transporting humans to unexplored destinations. While it is possible to quibble about details of lift capacity, etc., the plan for the Space Launch System announced by Administrator Bolden last week is responsive to this objective as is the intention to develop a new crew launch vehicle. When the time comes that one or more reliable commercial launch vehicles are available, it is these entities that should transport cargo and ultimately humans to low Earth orbit. Such capabilities will free NASA to focus on exploration beyond Earth orbit. The ultimate destination for our human spaceflight program should be astronauts on the surface of Mars. However, in the meantime, landing on a planetary body with significant gravity is especially complex and therefore expensive. In the meantime, expeditions to a Lagrange point or to rendezvous with an asteroid would be more straightforward technically to accomplish and would have the advantage of providing much needed experience for humans to function beyond Earth orbit. The American public, and by extension NASA, grows ever more risk averse. Today, I cannot imagine that we would send a mission to the moon if lightning struck the launch vehicle, as happened with Apollo 12. In human spaceflight, we require a full understanding of the technology we launch and the environments we traverse. Information returned from NASA's space science missions provides the context on the space environment that will enable future human exploration beyond low Earth orbit. Robotic observations provide information on radiation fluxes in space, surface hazards that jeopardize landings, Apollo 11 being a case in point, and atmospheric variability that will be relevant to landing on Mars. Robotic reconnaissance also provides guidance as to the most interesting areas to explore. My mission, GRAIL, was selected solely on the basis of its scientific goal of understanding the structure and evolution of the moon and its ability to advance similar understanding of the rocky planets, including Earth. However, the new understanding of gravity it will enable also provides distinct benefits for future robotic and human exploration. GRAIL will provide a precise gravity field and an accurate latitude-longitude grid that will greatly facilitate orbital navigation and, in addition, enable any future lunar spacecraft to land exactly where desired, thereby reducing risk and maximizing scientific return. Human exploration will also be an enabler for planetary exploration. While remote activities like antenna deployment and surface traverses can be accomplished remotely, humans could do such activities far more efficiently. The repair of the Hubble Space Telescope is perhaps the most obvious example of humans contributing significantly to the advance of science. A forward-looking endeavor that would be particularly suited to humans on the surface of another planet would be deep drilling. Imagine exploring below the surface of Mars to search where life retreated there when the planet lost its atmosphere early in its history. Imagine drilling deep into the moon to understand the role of solar heating over the past several hundred years, an activity that would elucidate the role of the sun in Earth's climate history. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the national discussion of how to implement a future sustainable human spaceflight program, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
All right. Thank you. And at this time, I recognize Dr. Michael Griffin for 5 minutes to present his testimony. Dr. Griffin. Your microphone.
Thank you. At this point, I feel a little bit like Zsa Zsa Gabor's eighth husband. I know what to do. I'm not sure how to make it interesting.
Your time's expired. And so has Zsa Zsa.
Thank you, sir. I'm honored to appear before you today to discuss the future of our space program because in this year of space shuttle retirement, the direction of our space program has been much in the news. But despite that, and prior to this hearing, in my opinion, the principal issue before us has not yet been addressed. The central issue to be decided by our nation's leaders at this time is simply this. Do we want to have a real space program or not? Based upon our behavior lately, I believe that most people would be forced to conclude that the answer is not. What is a real space program? Well, let's return to NASA's chartering legislation, the Space Act of 1958. In that seminal work, we find, among other things, that, quote, the aeronautical and space activities of the United States shall be conducted so as to contribute materially to the preservation of the role of the United States as a leader in aeronautical and space science and technology and in the application thereof, end quote. Now today, the United States is dependent upon a foreign power for the most important of those applications, human spaceflight, and our recovery plan, if that's the word for it, is to depend upon certain companies which have yet to show that they can deliver the laundry to the International Space Station, never mind the crew that would wear it. This does not seem like leadership to me. We're simply not living up either to the letter or to the spirit of the Space Act. To paraphrase my friend and colleague, Boeing Commercial Aircraft CEO Jim Albaugh, the current administration's view of our nation's future in space offers no dream, no vision, no plan, no budget, and no remorse. So do we want to have a real space program or not? It has been said that today that there is no important question to which space exploration is the answer. I think that's wrong. I think there are many such questions. What is the nature and value of a human future in space? What directions will human society take as a result of opening the space frontier? What social and cultural values will evolve and prevail, and how will we influence those developments? How is our stature as a world power affected if we are not active on the human space frontier when others are? What is the effect on our national security if we are no longer regarded as the preeminent world power? Can our nation remain open, vital, relevant, competitive, and forward-looking in science, technology, culture, and commerce if it turns back from the frontier of its time? To me, these questions are well worth answering, and to resolve them requires a national commitment to a human presence in space to define, occupy, extend, and exploit that frontier. Humans will commit themselves to that purpose. Whether the United States will be a leader in that endeavor is a question which properly confronts us today, and in my view, all else is detail. These truths were recognized in the NASA Authorization Act of 2005 and again in 2008, both of which originated in this committee. The course that was laid out in those acts does not need to be changed. It needs to be followed. If we do so, the right rocket designs will emerge. If we don't, the rocket design doesn't matter. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir, and I thank all of you for your testimony. And a reminder, committee rules, our question is limited to 5 minutes. Excuse me. The chair at this time will open the round of questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. And I join all of you, as all of us up here join you, and those who are not here that are occupied elsewhere with duties are interested in a bright future, some kind of a future for space. And if other nations are going to be there, we want to be there too. It's important to our national security. It's important to our children. It's important to our allies. It's important to our partners. And NASA has finally announced it's moving forward with the Space Launch System and Multipurpose Crew Vehicle. We need to preserve the skills and capabilities of our aerospace industrial base as much as possible so we don't lose the enormous benefits we've gained. And I'd like to ask all of you what near-term milestones and goals, what near-term goals do you think NASA and Congress needs to focus on? I hope we can preserve our place with our space station. We can stay active in space and have a presence in space that we don't have. It looks like we're gradually losing. And still pursue the Mars, but pursue it with little expenditure and not large expenditures, because ultimately we want to go to Mars or to asteroids or wherever they say we want to go. But I think we need to concentrate much less on that than we do on preserving our space station, have the cargo go up there and have our men and women to go as they have in the past. What are your what do you think about those goals, and what are your goals?
Thank you, sir. 16 months ago, I said the top three in this committee. I reported to this committee that the top three goals should be to first maintain a leadership position in space. The second, to guarantee access to space, to and from space. And third, to have an exploration focus. In that order. And I think that's consistent with what you just said, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gene, you have anything to add to that?
Yes, sir.
You're surely not going to differ with the two of us, are you?
Yes, sir. I'm an exploration guy at heart. After having the opportunity to go to the moon twice, staying home is not good enough for me. But I'm a realist also. We will go to the moon and back to the moon, and we will go on to Mars. Not as quickly or soon as I had hoped, but to me, the direction is more important than the time of when we go. I think our most crucial concern at this point in time is the ability just to get back in the low Earth orbit. We have a $100 billion investment up there and a commitment to our international partners that we cannot keep today because we have given up the capability in the shuttle with nothing to replace it at this point in time. Now, the SLS is great. I just hope that there's a derivative of the SLS that allows us to get humans, Americans, back in space prior to 2018 or 2020. Otherwise, the SLS truly is a vehicle that will someday allow us to go somewhere in space.
Dr. Zuber?
The most important thing is to develop a sense of forward motion. And that means the ability to get off the planet. So I have gone on record as saying that I believe that Nobel Prize caliber science is capable of being done on the space station. And I hope the opportunity occurs for the kind of science to get done on the space station that will lead to great discovery, because I think it can happen. But I also believe in getting out of Earth orbit. And I do think that getting a heavy launch vehicle is the right step in that direction, and that will lead to other great science beyond Earth orbit.
Thank you, and that's very well said. And thank you for your good testimony. Mike, do you want to zero in on that?
I'd like to echo the comment that we first have to be able to get to and from Earth orbit. I'm getting, no one could be more of a supporter of commercial space than I, but I'm getting tired of hearing that NASA should be left to work the hard problems. I will remind this committee that independent of what nation you're talking about, independent of what rocket you're talking about, approximately 1 in 50 times when we launch a rocket, it doesn't work. That's the state of human space technology today. About 1 in 50 times the launch fails. So to me, when we say that NASA should be working the hard problems, well, I think that's a hard problem. And our nation should secure for itself, independent of commercial capability, the ability to again place our people in orbit and get them back. After that, the next priority is a human expedition to return to the moon and to stay. And I think it should be this nation's privilege to lead an international partnership back to the moon, just as we did on space station. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have another question, but my time's expired. This time I recognize Mrs. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I did hear the comments about my reference to the past. And let me just say that without our predecessors, we would not have had that past, who had that vision. And without us becoming predecessors here with vision, we won't have a future. So that's why my real emphasis is on our future. I fully realize that until we are committed to spending the dollars for the research that space exploration brings us. We are sitting waiting for others to pass us by. And I think that it's not hard to see if we see what's going on today. I know that the budget is very tight, but is it too tight to look out for our future? That's my concern. I think when it gets too tight to look out for our future, we damn our future. Because without vision, people do perish. I don't think I have to wonder where you are. But I do know that unless we inspire our young minds that space exploration has done in the past, we won't have the people. When we cut back, we lose our talent. And when we lose our talent, we don't lose them to the next business or the next state or even the next lab. We lose them for the United States. And that is a real concern that I have. So what I'd like to hear you, and I think you have said much of this, but I want all of you to comment specifically on how can we proceed with the budget restraints that we do have and keep pace with the rest of the world.
Who wants to be second?
Well, I think the key is having the plan, a master plan that everyone supports, and with the plan, then there can be various design reference missions established to which the industry can respond, and NASA can select the most valuable one. There has to be a good deal of flexibility in the planning of going to new places. And in our both Gemini and Apollo program, we changed changed the mission almost every time. I think that'll continue in the future because you have to be flexible and ready to incorporate whatever new changes in the environment and the needs are. So I certainly support your view, and I do think having the plan that everyone agrees to is the key.
Thank you.
Ms. Cernan?
Ms. Johnson, you said three things that caught my attention in your opening statement. You talked about a public-private partnership to move forward, which I think is so significantly important. You talked about the fact that we cannot afford to proceed, which is the most true statement that anyone here in this room could make, including people at this table. But you also are concerned about education and the uncertainty of the workforce. This was something I spent a great deal of time on in my written testimony because I think that is a real challenge, a real risk. There's other risks. Oh, is the budget going to be ready? We're going to money? Is Congress going to agree? Is the NASA going to perform? The real risk, the real challenge of going forward are those young men and women whose talents we cannot afford to lose. The dreamers whose generation wants to take us back where we belong, and they truly believe that, did not join NASA to design windmills and rebuild brake pedals for some country, some other country. They joined NASA to do something unique and different that their parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles did. And this is the key to the future, are those young people. The old, wiser, smarter, more mature men and women are now retiring. People who have spent 50 years learning what they didn't know they didn't know. And they're turning that experience and over to this new enthusiastic young group. And the question you ask is, how do we keep them? And we're losing them in droves right now. I don't have an answer to your question other than we can't afford not to proceed forward. They're leaving. I know, I've talked to them. That concerns me as a major challenge Mr. Chairman, you asked us of how we get where we want to go.
Dr. Zuber, she doesn't have any more time left, but we're going to allot you 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. It's said often that the nation faces other challenges that need to be focused upon, and one example that's given is energy. I'm a faculty member at MIT where we have over 1,800 students in the Energy Club. So energy is at the top of the list of problems that our smart students want to solve. But when students are 6, 7, 8 years old, they're not thinking about solving the energy crisis. They want to be astronauts. And many of the students start out being interested in space. The decision point is in middle school, where you need to make the decision to take the hard math that leads you to calculus and AP science courses in high school, which leads you to science and engineering degrees in college. And that is where the space program provides a great deal of inspiration.
I couldn't agree more. For young people, high school and early college, other than prayer, energy is probably the most important word in the dictionary. Thank you for that. Jerry?
I don't need to extend our time further. I think the prior witnesses have answered well.
Well, the gentlelady did have another minute. If you want to give her an answer, she's entitled to it.
I would repeat Captain Cernan's question. How can we afford not to do it? What is the value of U.S. leadership? That's the question to be answered, not what the cost is. If the U.S. fails to lead in space, it is unimaginable to me that we will remain a leader on Earth, and I submit that the cost of that is far higher than the NASA budget many times over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to answer.
Thank you. Gentlelady, time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I think that you are to be commended for calling this very timely hearing, because we are at a crossroads. I think I can answer Gene Cernan's question, about, how do we keep people in the program and how do we attract new people, and that's given them something to do. And I don't think that the direction that the administration has set out gives them something to do that is achievable in the short or the medium term. Now, I was around here sitting in Mr. Hall's place 12 years ago and repeatedly expressed my concern that the seed corn of looking forward past assembling the International Space Station and going the next round was being diverted to pay for the Russian part of the space station that the Russians didn't want to pay for. And that was signed off on by then Vice President Gore and NASA Administrator Dan Golden. And we are suffering now from the consequences of that decision, which most of the members of this committee on a bipartisan basis at the time very strongly disagreed with. All of that being said, we're basically trying to make up maybe 12 to 15 years of the consequences of the decision that we had to pay the Russians to do what they refused to do in order to get the station going. So, I agree with the priorities that have been set out, but how do we rekindle the imagination of the American public on space in a very, very tight budget time after 15 years of letting the imagination, if not the appropriations, go and lay fallow? And I'd like to, specifically ask Mr. Armstrong and Captain Cernan on how to do it, because what we hear now from the President on down is, well, we shouldn't go back to the moon because we've been there and done that. Now, you've been there and done that, and Gene, you've been there and done it twice. So, the first thing we've got to do is we've got to have a John F. Kennedy moment, because the public backed what Kennedy called for in his address, and NASA got the Apollo program done on time, actually early, and under budget. So how do we do this? You know, you've been symbols. Even before you went to the moon, you are still symbols, looking at the crowd that we have here in the committee and behind you in the public area of this committee. Let's know, you know, what we can do to rekindle the American spirit and make this a can-do kind of thing, because the money will follow if the public supports it.
Cernan identified an important issue. The reality is that people can be highly motivated if there is hope. And right now, the sense that I have is too many young people have the view that there's too little going on in American space effort in the next decade, which they're preparing for, so they may turn other directions. And so having something in the pipeline that gives hope to the young people is key. And it's important not only to the young people, but the existing people of NASA. I note that in yesterday's Aviation Week, there's a quote from the Johnson Space Center director that says his greatest challenge is the retention of the installation's human spaceflight expertise in the face of falling budgets and significant personnel issues and losses.
Captain Cernan.
Thank you. You know, all young kids, all of us, as growing up, had a dream to be something we didn't think we could be, to do something we didn't think was possible. Neil had a dream. I'm sure I had a dream of flying airplanes. Little did I know that that dream, many, many years later, would lead me to the moon. If you can find something today, and I talked to a lot of kids from college, high school, right down into my grandkids' 4th grade graduation class. There is enthusiasm out there. There is nothing more that I've found more than aviation and space that excites kids' minds and hearts, that inspires them to dream, to be one of those. Poppy, why can't I do that? Why can't I go to the moon? You can do that. The kindling is there. We just got to put a little bit more fire in a pot. We got to market what we're trying to do. We need. Let me tell you, it's not good enough for these kids to say, "Oh, when I grow up, I can get put in a room and I can develop technology to do something with." Or when I grow up, I can solve the problems of global warming, which is where some people want to take NASA, quite frankly. That's not going to do it. These kids, this generation, whether they're from 4 to 24, need something that their generation can make happen. And don't tell me I can't do it. Don't challenge the American people. Don't tell them it's not possible, because they'll make it happen. That's a big order, and how you put that together, I don't know. But we need. That's why this mission to nowhere is always bothered. We need a mission to somewhere we could put our fingers on, touch, and say, in the year 2022 or 2042, quite frankly, I don't care. I said a minute ago, it's the direction that counts, not the time we get there. We can give these kids and these young people something that they can make happen in their generation. I think we're halfway to answering the question. And I need to say something more, Ms. Johnson, that I didn't include about people and young people in the workforce. There's an old saying, technology makes it possible. People make it happen. It's only reason Neil and I are sitting here today. The technology was going to come. It's the people who gave us the opportunity to do what we did. And those are the people we have to stimulate and get excited about doing something today. You know, when we talk about program in disarray and no destination, those are real facts of life. We got to change that.
All right, gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Smith, gentleman from Texas. By the way, the annual legislative conference started this morning. There's a large group in town, probably about 20,000 people, so that's where a lot of our people are. Mr. Smith, recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address my first question to Mr. Armstrong and Captain Cernan, both Apollo commanders. Mr. Armstrong, you mentioned a while ago the 3 goals: leadership, access, exploration. What I'd like to know specifically, if you could tell us, and the same goes for Captain Cernan, what can we do specifically to reclaim America's leadership in space exploration? Any specific vehicles or missions you want to point to? A minute ago, Dr. Griffin mentioned going back into orbit and back to the moon. Do you have the similar priorities, or are there other priorities? But what specifically can we do to reclaim our leadership? Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you. I believe we're committed to the space station. We have commitment with other nations, and we must do that, and there's much to be gained from it if we do it properly. Right now, we find ourselves in a box where we're not able to fully man the station, and consequently, we are unable to get very much productivity out of it, because with the few people that are there, they have to spend most of their time just keeping the station operating, and there's little time for the necessary research that is the productive output of the station. That's unfortunate, but true. Second, I share the goal that the moon is the most logical return past near Earth orbit, and I support that.
Okay, thank you. Captain Cernan?
Yes, sir. I think the first thing we got to do is prove to the rest of the world we're for real. We're here to stay. We're not going to give the 50 years of what we became. I mean, we just cut the cord. I said a minute ago, it's over, supposedly, and the rest of the world has got a right to feel. I feel that way. We've got to prove to the rest of the world we're for real. We've got to first get our tails off the ground and get back into Earth orbit and service a space station that we committed to, and service the people who we committed access to that space to. Get the shuttle out of the garage down there at Kennedy, crank up the motors, put it back in service. There is no, you want a launch vehicle today that'll service the ISS? We got it sitting down there. So before we put it in a museum, let's make use. It's in its prime of its life. How could we just put it away? Get us back in space. That's the first thing. And then, once we get that going again, and people out there know that we're still in a race and still in a run, then let's put a long-term program together. Whether it uses the SLS or some other system to get us where we want to go, I don't care. Let's just get into space and then decide where we want to go when we want to leave Earth orbit, which is vitally important.
Thank you, Captain Cernan. Dr. Griffin, 2 questions for you. You've written in the past, and I think expressed concerns about the Chinese manned spaceflight program. Are we in danger of losing our lead? Are the Chinese pulling ahead of us?
Well, in my opinion, China understands what it takes to be a great power. We have written the script for them. Yeah. We were not a great power prior to World War II, and since then we have been the world's great power. They understand that because we showed them how to do it. They are a near-peer competitor of ours, and I would worry very much about the future of this nation if we were not seen by all to be a world leader. And I do not understand how a nation which, when the Chinese can reach the moon and we cannot, I don't see why any other nation would regard us as a world leader.
Okay. Dr. Griffin, last question. In your written testimony today, you mentioned the lack of a business case for commercial space companies, and you mentioned conflicting priorities. What are those conflicting priorities? What are your concerns about the commercial space companies?
Well, I have a number of concerns, the chief one of which is that we have offered to the commercial space companies which are struggling to get into existence, we've offered them the space station market. But the space station market is small and it's temporary. And as Captain Cernan and Mr. Armstrong have stated many times, and I echo them, we need something beyond, we need something more. I firmly believe that with a large enough market, commercial space can be successful, initially with cargo, and then later on with crew. But there is no business case to invest for the space station market alone. We need to have the lunar base market. If there is no business case, then to keep these companies in business will require direct government subsidy. And I am unalterably opposed to direct government subsidy. I am a supporter of commercial space. I am opposed to subsidies.
Okay.
So I can end with that.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And might point out that Norm Augustine recommended from that same table $2 billion a year to several past presidents. $3 billion a year, I'm just off $1 billion. Came as close as a woman did to having twins. Don't you agree with that, that it's money, we're talking about money, more money, when we have less than 1% of the budget? It's outrageous that they didn't accommodate us with that extra $3 billion, as that committee suggested. We wouldn't be where we are today if they'd listened to them. Next, we recognize Mr. Rohrbacher. Okay, I'll recognize Mr. Rohrbacher. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to place in the record a letter that was sent to members of Congress but was recently passed on by the same organization to Mr. Armstrong. And it's a letter from it's called the Students for Exploration and Development of Space. It had 300 signatures of space-related students who are involved with the engineering and space-related activity. I'd like to place that in the record, Mr. Chairman, at this point.
Without objection.
And just so Mr. Cernan, I would, if you could, I would appreciate you reading this letter, because it does express these 300 students who already have committed their lives to training for involvement in space, how important commercial space is to their dreams. And the fact is, they do not look forward to being government employees or parts of the space bureaucracy, but look forward to challenges that they think the private sector will be able to take over and be involved in the future. And it's a very inspiring letter, and I would suggest that. We have some serious challenges, and I believe that unless we take advantage of the commercial space alternative as part of that solution, that we will not succeed. And let me just ask a couple questions that lead me to that conclusion, and that is NASA has just announced a $38 billion program to develop the SLS, okay, new space launch system, which will be a heavy launch system. But the immediate challenge that you, Mr. Cernan, have described to us is getting into space now to meet the challenge that we have of servicing the space station and meeting our goals just in the next few years. And $38 billion for a rocket that will not be in any way available until the earliest at 2017 for cargo and 2021 for crew. That $38 billion means that that's draining money every year from the potential that we have of having these short-term goals, at least, fulfilled. Budget is a real thing here. We believe in vision and dreams, but we have to have real-line budgets, or those dreams and visions will never come into reality. And without the commercial space people who are putting their own money and putting private money into the endeavor of building space transportation systems, we're not going to meet any of those short-term goals that you spoke about. Now, I'd like to think that the shuttle can just pick up all this task and do this. The shuttles, we've had 2 shuttle crashes. We know that it's vulnerable. And the fact is that the shuttle cost Mr. Griffin, how much does it cost per shuttle flight? We're talking about $1 billion, aren't we?
It depends on how many shuttle flights you do. It costs about $2.4 billion a year, or a little less, to own the shuttle, just to own it. Right. And it costs about $300 million after that for each successive flight.
Right. So we're talking about a huge expenditure, and that money's coming from someplace. And if it comes especially from neutering the commercial space program by not giving them a contract to be able to put some private sector money in to meet the public sector contracts, we've done a big disservice to these 300 students who have vision about what they want to do in the next 10 years of their life, and they want to be associated with our space program. So we've got some major decisions here. I really appreciate your testimony of all of you here today, but I think that we all need to work together so that we have not only a vision of space, but we also have a vision of how we're going to go about it in a practical way that we can meet our budget obligations. And Mr. Griffin, I know that you have been a supporter of commercial space in the past, but this idea that commercial space hasn't even shown anything that they can deliver laundry, I don't understand that. It seems to me that we've got a lot of other programs we've had in NASA over the last few years that have been over budget and not on time and cost us a lot, and we end up canceling the program. And it's just a very frustrating thing for us. So thank you very much. I have only got my 5 minutes is over now, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll give Mr. Griffin a chance to answer you if he wants to.
Let me be clear for the record. I'm not in support of running programs that go over budget, behind schedule, or don't do what they're supposed to do. The government can operate programs and do programs efficiently, as can commercial entities. I think we should strive for that. I am not opposed to the development of commercial space. When a commercial capability is ready to emerge, a government declaration of that fact is not necessary, and in fact, government can't stop it. And when a commercial capability is not ready to emerge, nothing that the government can do will make a business case for something which is commercial that is not ready to emerge.
Gentleman, time has expired unless the gentleman wants to make an answer. All right. Chair now recognizes Mr. Nagelbauer, gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would make a couple of points and certainly appreciate our great witnesses today. There's a lot of debate and discussion out there of where we go with our space program. And I don't know if this is true or not, but somebody told me a number of years ago after President Kennedy set the goal out for our nation that everywhere you went in NASA was little placards that said the moon, because that was the goal and it was the focus, and that everything that everybody got up every day and said, what do we do to advance to the goal of going to the moon? So I think two questions I have this morning is if we don't appear to have a clear goal of where we're going with our space program, and what would you recommend ways that we could bring some kind of consensus of where we're going? And the second piece of the discussion is there are people that say, do we really need the manned portion, that with the technology that we have today, can we do space exploration without using manned portion of it? And obviously you two gentlemen have participated in the manned portion of it. And your reflections on, does all of it have to be manned or some of it unmanned, and how does that fit into the overall goal? And Mr. Armstrong, certainly just start with your reflections.
There's enormous value in our unmanned programs. Many of them can go places where humans will never be able to go. So there's information to be gained, and these knowledge gaining probes are imperative for our continued exploration of space. But the human program is designed with goals to give our future generations options of how to expand, where to survive, how to survive. Very big questions of the destiny of our human race. So I think those kind of questions must be investigated by humans, and they cannot be done by unmanned spacecraft.
As Neil said, the unmanned program is vitally important. Everywhere we've been, there's been unmanned programs that have preceded us. There's unmanned programs going on now which precede those who will follow us. So I think they're vitally important. You know, at one time someone thought the first landing on the moon would come out the other side. It was nothing but a bunch of gas. Well, you know, there's a lot of things we don't know about what's out there, about the universe in which we live, and the unmanned program is vital. The rovers on Mars, the Hubble itself lets our imagination stretch out. But I don't mean to make light of it, but there's never been ticker tape parade for a robot. Neil's name is the most known name in the universe. You said that. The world, the universe. For a reason. He's a human being. He can come back and tell you what it feels like, what it looks like, what it was like to be there. This is what people, Lewis and Clark didn't send an empty canoe up the river. And the people, and I'm not making light of it. Human beings have to follow in the footsteps of everything we can send before them. We send unmanned spacecraft to make it safer, to make sure we're going to get back, so we can share these feelings and thoughts with you. Going back to one of your first questions that said moon during Apollo on everybody's door. That was a destination. That was a goal. The goal was to get there before the end of the year. Or the decade. We were going to get there sometime. When Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon, he said that 3 weeks after Alan Shepard went up and came down. 16 minutes of spaceflight experience. We know beans about going to the moon. The technology didn't exist. But all the people who were working on this program knew that's where we're going to go, and American ingenuity was going to find a way to get there. And a testimonial to that ingenuity is the fact to American enterprise is the fact that everyone who went to the moon, including Apollo 13, came back home to talk about it.
Gentleman's time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Rohrbacher. Chair now recognize Mr. Nagelbauer.
What?
Recognize gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me just say what an honor it is to be in the presence of the first man to land on the moon and the last man to land on the moon. I've said before, Mr. Armstrong, 1,000 years from now, no one will remember anybody in this town, but your name will be known. Your testimony, Mr. Armstrong, was quite revealing. You said NASA has been unable to articulate a master plan that excites the imagination and provides a semblance of predictability to the aerospace industry. And you went on to say, we will have no American access to and return from low Earth orbit in the International Space Station for an unpredictably length of time in the future. For a country that has invested so much for so long to achieve a leadership position in space exploration, this condition is viewed by many as lamentably embarrassing and unacceptable. Captain Cernan, you talked about John Kennedy and his vision. And we have on the wall here, where there's no vision, the people perish, from Proverbs. I'm concerned this administration, this president, has no vision. I'm also concerned that the next flag to possibly land on the moon will not be an American flag, but rather a Chinese or a Russian flag. And let's not forget the national security implications that are at stake here, as Dr. Griffin talked about. So many people ask me, and I have Austin to Houston, so I have a lot of Johnson Space employees in my district. been to that room where mission control took place in 1969. And so many people ask me, we landed on the moon in 1969. Why has it taken so long to go back? Why has it taken so long? And why is it important today that we go back to the moon? And so with that, I'd like to recognize you, Mr. Armstrong, and Captain Cernan to answer that question.
America was reveling in the successes of the Apollo program, but there were after you win a big game, why there's a letdown, and that was an opportunity for some to say, well, maybe we made a big investment in space exploration, space flight. Perhaps it's time to reap some rewards. So let's look at Earth for a while. Let's be in low Earth orbit and spend a lot of time studying Earth and the environs of Earth and get a great return from this investment. And indeed, that's what we did. The shuttle, one of the most magnificent flying machines ever built with highest technology machines, however, cost more to fly and couldn't fly as often as had been predicted by its designers, due to reasons that are completely understandable in retrospect. But it used up a lot of the human spaceflight budget, and there was an inadequate opportunity to be developing follow-on spacecraft that would succeed it. And I think that is the principal cause of the question that you ask.
Captain Cernan?
After I came back from the moon on Apollo 17, I got on my soapbox at Kennedy talking to the people at a homecoming. And I said, we're not, Apollo 17 was the end. And, how does it feel to be the tail of the dog, the last one over the fence? And I got up on my soapbox and said, it's not the end, it's just the beginning of a whole new era in the history of mankind. And I truly did believe it. I said, we're not only going to go back to the moon, we will be on our way to Mars by the turn of the century. Well, my glass was half empty for a long time until Constellation came along, and then it became half full. And it gave this country something, I think, to look forward to again. It re-inspired those young people to dream. And the dreamers of today are the doers of tomorrow. And if we don't inspire those young kids to dream, there isn't going to be any tomorrow. And that's what I was looking at. That's what it was all about. I forgot the other half of your question, Congressman, but inspiration of these young kids and a goal for them to put their hands on and look forward to, I think is what this country needs more than anything else. And I'll say it again, I'm at a point in my life where Neil and I aren't going to see those next young Americans who walk on the moon. And God help us if they're not Americans. That if there's somebody else, or if it's a team of people that is not led by Americans, we're not going to be here. We're going to take that last trip off this earth long before that happens. That's unfortunate, and I never believed it would be that way. But it will. But I'm satisfied with that as long as I know, and when I leave this planet, I want to know where we are headed as a nation. That's my big goal. I just feel so strongly about that. And I feel sometimes helpless, other than to share those feelings with ladies and gentlemen like you, because I'm not making the decision to make it happen. I can only try and get people enthused about pointing themselves in that direction.
Let me just say thank you for your service and thank you for your inspiration to not only Americans but the world. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the lady from Florida, Mrs. Adams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on behalf of the Florida Space Coast and the tens of thousands of men and women who in Florida actually have dedicated their lives to advancement of this country's space program, I want to thank all of you for your service. Dr. Griffin, I'm going to go back to a few things that have bothered me since I've been elected here in this august body. I just have a few questions. They're going to be kind of quick because I want to stay within my 5 minutes, and you can answer yes or no, and you don't have to expound if you don't feel the need. But when you were administrator of NASA, did you or your deputies ever ignore one of the authorization bills?
Not ever.
Did you ever get subpoenaed by a House or Senate committee for outright ignoring their request for information?
Well, no, ma'am.
Were you or your deputies ever accused of sabotaging, or by a senator, of sabotaging a NASA project just because you didn't agree with Congress?
Absolutely not.
Did you ever decide to ignore the role or will of Congress when they asked you for plans to implement the next step in President Bush's vision for NASA?
Again, no, ma'am.
Can you think of any reason to slow roll a project that has been authorized and demanded by Congress and federal law?
Well, if the chief executive doesn't want to do the project, then logically speaking, they will slow roll it because every 2 years there's an election and there's a chance to try again, whereas if you start a project, it becomes more difficult to cancel it. So if I didn't want to do a project and was a different branch of government, then yes, I might slow roll it. I'm not endorsing that, but if you ask me if there's a reason to slow roll it, that would be the reason.
So can you think of any reason why it would be acceptable for a NASA administrator or his or her deputy to ignore Congress?
It's not acceptable. Congress, I remind people frequently that they need to read Article 1 of the Constitution.
Well, as you probably guessed, I'm kind of miffed at the fact that NASA has done everything in their power to slow us down. I know there was an authorization bill that was passed before I got here, and we are just now learning that they may have come up with a plan for the SLS. So I just was curious in past administrations how that worked.
Well, ma'am, I would say when you say that the blame falls on NASA, I must, with respect, disagree. NASA is a federal executive agency, and they work for the president. And they must follow the instructions of the president, and so the administrator really has no choice in this matter.
So you believe that he or she was directed?
If the administrator is doing opposite to that, which the president desires, then he is mutinous, and so therefore one must conclude that the administrator is doing as the chief executive requests.
Thank you. Dr. Zuber, some have argued, and the President specifically, that there's no need for the United States to return back to the moon. The argument has basically been there, done that, and you've heard that here today from people questioning that logic. Do you agree with this assessment? Do you think there's anything more that landing on the moon could teach us?
Okay, so first of all, I'll say that my mission GRAIL, which is en route to the moon, and will arrive, the 2 spacecraft will arrive on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day of this year, was it's a NASA Discovery mission, and it was the highest rated proposal of the 24 proposals submitted, both science and implementation. So the scientific rationale was viewed by the scientific community to be the best among the proposals that were submitted during that round. So the science community feels that there was a compelling reason to return to the moon.
And you do also, I assume.
Obviously. But let me give you an example of one of the many scientific questions that you could answer if you go back to the moon. If you look at the moon in a telescope, it's heavily cratered. It was bombarded by all the material that was left over when the planets formed. Okay? Earth used to look like that. Okay, but the record isn't preserved on Earth because it's been eroded, subducted. It's not there. The craters aren't there. But Earth was that heavily cratered. And the age of the surface of the moon at the time that occurred is about the same time that the first single-celled organisms were arising on Earth. And so by studying the moon, we can learn about the moon, but we can also learn about the conditions that must have also existed on Earth at the time.
So returning to the moon is not useless then. So I appreciate that. And Captain Cernan, Mr. Armstrong, how do we get NASA to move forward with a solid mission if the authorization bill passed last year and we're just now hearing of an SLS? Is there any way that we can encourage them to come forward with a solid mission, a vision, I guess, so that we can encourage our young people, our youth, to get more involved again?
Boy, that's a tough one. You got to recreate a John F. Kennedy. You got to have his, whether he was a dreamer, a visionary, or politically astute, we'll never know. He was probably all three, quite frankly, considering the times. I'd like to believe he was a dreamer and a visionary. I'll leave the politically astute go to history. And you don't try and mandate to an administration or to a NASA to do something, and they may do it, but if they don't believe in it, they're going to do what just Mike said. They can slow ball it, do a lot of things. It's got to be, you got to have somebody, a commander-in-chief who is given the orders to move forward, to believe and commit himself and understand that this is one of the most important things this nation can do to maintain its leadership. And if you look at the cost versus other things where we're spending our money, Mike reinformed me last night, 15 cents for every American on this in the country. 15 cents it costs to support NASA's budget.
15 cents per day.
15 cents per day. Fine. No one understands what 0.5% of our budget is, but people understand that we're spending more money to feed the cat and dog in this country than it costs me to support the space program. I guarantee you, if you put a little mark on that income tax thing and said, would you give 15 cents a day or $1 or $10 of your tax return to NASA to go back to the moon, I guarantee you'd have enough money to go there and back twice. I just believe that. We just don't give our people a chance to express themselves because they don't know what it's for. They don't have that goal, that destination, that thing that's going to incite them, inspire them.
Young lady's time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Palazzo, the gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you, Chairman Hall, for holding this hearing today and inviting these distinguished panelists to come talk to us. It is an honor to hear their testimony, and if ever the axiom applied to Congress to listen to the people, well, we just need to listen to y'all today. The cause of exploration takes time and has many stages. I would like to get your opinions based on your years of experience. Commanders Armstrong and Cernan, based on your experience during the Apollo program in particular, what is the value gained in systems level ground testing, especially the type of engine work done at Stennis Space Center?
In preparation for this hearing, I took the opportunity to discuss some of the questions that were provided to us that would be of interest to the committee with the leaders of the industry. And they universally said that the cutting-edge programs that typically NASA engendered were one of the most important factors in their moving their industry forward and being competitive on the world stage. They all believed that this was enormously important to them, and they were very concerned with the declining amount of programs that they were seeing in the pipeline.
Commander Cernan.
I don't want to avoid your question, but I think I answered a little while ago. Everyone who went to the moon came home. That's the value of ground testing. That's why, we're sending human beings. We're not sending, what was the word, biological specimens, as I heard from the commercial sector.
A recent quote was biological cargo.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We're biological cargo. That came from the commercial side. Okay, I feel a little bit less secure about that statement. Give you an example real quick is on Apollo 17, the LEM that we were flying was the last LEM that Grumman was ever going to build, design, and test. And the guys who were ground testing that vehicle before we went to the moon, 90% of them already had their pink slip. They were done. And they came up to me as a group and said, Captain Cernan, don't worry about this LEM. It's the best LEM and most ready LEM and most capable LEM that's ever been lifted off from Kennedy, and by God, they were right. And that goes back to the inspiration of having a goal, a motivation. Their goal was to see us succeed. And their ground testing made it possible that we did.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Griffin, would you like to comment as well?
Well, I'm the youngest engineer on the panel because I'm preceded by my two elder colleagues. I can only support to the maximum what they say. When we don't test adequately on the ground, we usually find our flaws in flight, and unlike airplanes with rockets, we often don't get it back. As I remind some of my friends from the software industry in the space business, after a crash, we can't reboot. So I think the ground testing is crucial. I would remind everybody that at the present time, Stennis Space Center is the last place in the country where we can conduct large-scale rocket engine testing. When I was much younger, I tested rocket engines at the Rocket Propulsion Lab at Edwards, and those facilities are now in decline. So this is an industrial base issue, as Captain Cernan has referred to earlier, and we need to be extremely careful because our industrial base is eroding before our eyes.
I got to believe that's just as important in Dr. Zuber's profession. She's got too much effort, too much time, too much money, and too much at stake not to do what's right before, as you say, get up in here and find out you missed something.
We launched a Delta II Heavy from Pad 17, and actually I was privileged to go up to the top of the tower during the rollback, and we had to scrub the launch a couple of times due to weather. And so by the third time that we went out, I was the only one, aside from the crew, who was up at the top of the tower when we pulled back. And when we pulled it back, we had the rocket in front of us. And the guys at the top said, can we just sit here and look at it a while, because we're closing down this pad after this rocket launches, and I believe we're never going to see this site again.
Well, thank you all for your commentary. I believe it was somewhere in one of these hearings that someone said it's better to be frustrated and being grounded instead of being up in the air wishing you were on the ground. So thank you all for your commentary. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. And at this time, mentioning scrubbing some of the lift-offs, we have in the audience Kate Cronmiller, who was a long time with USA. You mentioned the ladies, Sandy, in your presentation. She's one of the leading. She was with USA. They were the ones that say 10, 9, 8, 7, that saved the lives of those that would have been endangered if they lifted off. Kate, thank you for all you've done. Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Brooks, the gentleman from Alabama, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It truly is an honor to be in the presence of such an esteemed panel. This question is directed at each of you who wishes to volunteer a response. In your experience, is a NASA-led and run human spaceflight program crucial or important to America's national security, and if so, how? Whoever wishes to go first.
Thank you, sir. Well, I think, I'm on record, I think that the Congress of 50-some years ago got it right with the Space Act when they created a civilian space agency to lead that effort. It has allowed us to conduct extraordinarily effective partnerships with other nations. In my mind, the greatest value of a civilian human spaceflight organization is its national security value. And I'll just take a minute because that's an odd comment. The United States is a world superpower. We are a world power, and I think we want to continue to be. And in that role, we have to do hard things. We have to do things that not everyone else in the world wishes we did or likes that we did. It then behooves us as a nation, and I feel very passionately about this, it behooves us to temper those things that we have to do by proactively looking for things we can do to find common cause with other nations. to bind us in alliances and partnerships for things people like to do. Now, as especially Gene has said over and over, young folks, even us older folks, love aviation and space. When we do exciting, challenging, frontier-oriented space projects and do them in a leadership role in concert with other nations to do things that they like to do, this binds us to the rest of the world in a way which is only positive. There is no dark cloud around this particular silver lining. And that, in my mind, only enhances our security, national security, the security of our values and freedoms and culture in the world. And if every dollar that had ever been spent on NASA and the civilian human space program were looked at solely from a national security perspective, A, it would be a round-off error in the DoD budget, and B, it would be worth every penny. I'm sorry to have taken so much time, but thank you.
Well, I have another follow-up question, but if anyone else would like to add something very quickly on this.
You've heard in national security, high ground is most important. Today, in today's world, the high ground is technology. Technology is the high ground, and even more so than the evolution and development of technology, the space program probably moved technology beyond whatever we imagined it could possibly move, and quickly. Very quickly. And by the way, we did so without the destruction of hundreds of cities and the loss of millions of lives. So that's what we need to look at, is the evolution of technology. And if we are static, if we sit here and watch other people develop technology, it's going to affect our economy, it's going to affect the marketplace. It's not just going to affect our ability to go into space, it's going to affect our way of life.
Thank you. I was reviewing the written testimony of Mr. Armstrong, and one paragraph really jumped off the page to me, and I'm going to quote it. The uncertainties associated with the radical changes in space plans and policies of the last 2 years contributed to a substantial erosion of the United States' historically highly regarded space industrial base. Thousands of jobs have been lost, and the space component of the industry is perceived as unstable, discouraging students from considering preparing themselves for entry into this exciting but demanding career path. In light of the relationship between a NASA-led and run human spaceflight program and national security, how does this loss of space industrial base harm national security? Whoever would wish to address that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I would say surveillance and reconnaissance are two of the two prime things that are associated with national security, and the same skills that are required to do that on the military side are part of the human space program. Students are never going to be inspired by things that go on the dark side that they'll never hear about, but they're certainly very inspired to develop the technical and scientific skills that are necessary in the civil space program.
When security is an issue, it's generally because there's a perceived threat of some sort, and those threats are often directed toward weakness. And whenever any country has the high ground, as Captain Cernan said, has the technology clearly in hand, is on top of all the various disciplines, and there are no perceived witnesses, it acts as a prophylactic, a discouragement of possibly initiating actions that are in the security range.
Mr. Chairman, I see I'm run over time, but may I have 30 more seconds for a concluding remark?
Without objection, gentleman's granted 30 more seconds.
I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and with great pride would feel the earth shake and hear the boom and roar of the Saturn V as it was tested. The very same Saturn Vs that sent you gentlemen to the moon. And I remember the day that you, Neil, touched down on the moon, and the pride that I had as a teenager in our country. And I pray that this committee and this Congress and the White House will give future generations that same feeling that I was blessed with what you achieved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well said, sir. And I've been told that another reason this is a national security item is that we may be defending the next war partially out of space. I think that's to be remembered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Hultgren, gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say, Mr. Armstrong, Captain Cerny, you are exceptional Americans. And you have, whether you know it or not, been a part of, I believe, making America exceptional. And I just want to thank you for that. A lot of people try and remember their earliest memory. I'm 45. My earliest memory is standing in a playpen, looking at a black and white TV screen, watching you land. And that's amazing. But I also feel the, as Congressman Brooks said, the pride and the challenge of that of, wow, you know, look what we did. It wasn't what you did, what we did. I didn't understand that then, but it went on with the entire program. And so I just want to say thank you. We are so grateful. And I know you're humble men, and I'm so grateful for that as well. But I do want to thank you for all that you've done and the sacrifices that you've made, the risks that you've taken, but the impact that you've had on our nation and our world. I just want to thank you for that. I do want to ask a couple quick questions. I know time is short on this, but Dr. Griffin, wondered if I could ask you just quickly. You talked briefly about the Chinese. I am concerned about where things are at there. I know their Chinese Long March 5 rocket is in development. I wondered if you could compare that to anything in the American inventory of what we have. When it's built, is it really larger than anything that we have? And why do you think the Chinese are building such a large rocket?
Well, the Long March 5 is comparable in scale to today's Delta IV Heavy or to the Ares 1 crew vehicle, which we were going to build and which was canceled. So it's on the order of, and of course until it flies regularly we won't actually know, but it's on the order of 25 tons of payload to low Earth orbit. So it's not in the class of, say, the Saturn V or the New Space Launch System. But it's a very significant capability, and in fact, by launching and rendezvousing 4 of those in low Earth orbit, it would be possible for the Chinese to construct a manned lunar mission with no more than that rocket and no more than Apollo technology. And I have, in fact, in the past, written up how that mission would work from an engineering perspective. So with the Long March 5, the Chinese inherently possess the capability to return to the moon should they wish to do so.
And you're saying we don't have anything that would be comparable to that, obviously, other than what had been talked about.
Well, we have nice view graphs.
Yeah. Thank you. One other question I'd like to ask Mr. Armstrong, Captain Cerny. For a human space exploration program that we can be proud of here in America, do you think a 130 metric ton rocket is big enough, or would a bigger rocket be more appropriate? And wondered if, while answering the question, if you'd consider the situation that we are in, the financial situation that we're in.
As I said in my written testimony, that's not really a new idea. 25 years ago, roughly, the National Space Strategy included building of a rocket with 136 K, I think, tons. Yeah. So apparently the rocket design experts have sort of focused on that area as being a reasonable range for most of the deep space expeditions that they have envisaged. It's certainly clear that that the bigger you get economy of scale with rockets. So the bigger you build them, the less expensive the payload is going to. So if you have a need for a really big payload in space, you could certainly probably conjure a need for something bigger than 130 into low Earth orbit. My guess is that because aeronautical and aerospace engineers are always able to stretch airplanes and make them bigger, that they could also find ways to take that basic spacecraft and make it haul a bigger load to orbit by putting on more strap-ons or different upper stage or whatever. Probably doable.
Yeah, I'm going to leave the experts answer economy of scale problems and one thing or another because I'm not sure I'm that smart. But my personal feeling is when it comes to going to Mars, we're going to have to extend ourselves with some kind of propulsion system beyond something the size of the SLS. The SLS can get the hardware up there. But this is me talking. I'm unwilling to accept a 9-month trip to Mars and to come back when the planets are aligned a year and a half later, if that's the case, and 9 months to come home. And I'm also unwilling to accept going all the way to Mars and not landing. So I believe somewhere along the line we're going to that chemical propulsion is at going to the moon is about the useful extent, I believe. Now Mike may disagree with me about the use of chemical propulsion. We're going to have to develop a nuclear or proton, some kind of other system what gets us to Mars in 60 to 90 days. This allows us to stay as short or long a time as we want to stay and come home when we want to come home. I think that's the real key and the real secret to going to Mars. I think the SLS, that size of boosters, probably is necessary, I would guess, to get the equipment and the hardware up there and get it on its way. But we can't use the planets and the gravity to coast like we did to the moon. We coasted to the moon. We can't do that going to Mars. We've got to find something better.
Just to add on, Captain Cernan is quite right. It's possible to go to Mars with chemical propulsion, but we really need to revitalize our nuclear thermal propulsion programs. Gene, when you flew to the moon, we had a nuclear upper stage that had been tested, was being tested, and the next thing it needed was a flight test, and it was canceled. So that alone would have made the difference. I'm sorry to intrude, but
no, it's good. I appreciate that. Well, my time is up, but again, I want to just thank you for all that you've done. And this is personal for me. I've got 4 kids, 17 to 7. Love all my kids. My 7-year-old Cole wants to be a scientist, and I think he would love to be an astronaut. I'd like him to be able to do that from America and not have to go to another country to be an astronaut. So this is so important. This is personal, and I thank you for all that you've done, and you inspire us forward into the challenges that we've got to make sure that we remain exceptional as a nation. So God bless you. Thank you so much.
Can I get personal for 20 more seconds? Neil and I were the tip of the arrow.
Yeah.
It's these folks, you folks, and you're here because you want to be. You're inspired because of space and aviation. Thousands and thousands of people out there with the strength behind the bow. Tell your kids and every other kid you ever see. Tell them the guys who went to the moon said, always shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, you're going to land somewhere among the stars. That's all they need. Yeah. That's all they need to foster their dreams.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Kravak, gentleman from Minnesota, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, it's rare that you have the opportunity to meet a hero when you're a kid, and here I'm in the presence of 2 of them. So thank you very much for everything that you've done. All these years, Dr. Armstrong, you know, and watching that film, my heart was racing. I knew the end of the story, but at the same time, you know, my heart was racing the whole time because I knew what you had to do to get the LEM on the ground. So I appreciate just having that opportunity to share that with you. And Captain Cernan and Dr. Armstrong, you know, you hit the nail on the head, at least for me, when you're talking just momentarily, just talking about inspiring the youth, the next generation, because you were the guys who inspired me. Because at least when I grew up there, it was a small town in Madera, Ohio, where I flew your mission 1,000,000 times in a refrigerator box with a chair on its back. And it eventually led me to becoming a Navy pilot. So
I know we both share the wings gold there. So you inspired me to become a Navy pilot. So thank you. You know, space does inspire. You know, it's amazing to me. Probably this phone has more computing power than the LEM did. And here we are today. Yes. Yeah, that is truly inspiring to know that this phone controls more computing power than what it took to the vehicle to land on the moon. And I know that you're involved in a couple programs. We were talking very briefly, Captain Cernan, down in Pensacola, what you guys are doing down there. Could you expound upon that a little bit, how you're inspiring the next generation?
Well, very quickly, we've had a program and worked for about 20 years. It's a $40 million private investment program down in Pensacola at the Naval Air Station. Not to make naval aviators out of everybody, although we might make a few. To inspire young kids to dream, use aviation as the hook, get their attention, make learning fun. You can teach a kid anything. And we have a program down there called the National Flight Academy. And you walk in the front doors and you're on you're on a USS Reagan or Truman or whatever carrier you want to be. You're immersed in an aircraft carrier for a week, 7 or 8 days of your time. And we hope when those kids come out of there, they now believe that they can become and do anything they want to do, that they can make their dreams come true if they have some confidence and faith in themselves and are given the opportunity by people like you and me. And this program is tied up with major universities, Georgia Tech, Embly-Riddle, Texas A&M, and soon Purdue University. Neil and I have a personal attraction to Purdue, by the way. And that's the point. You got to start when they're 8 and 10 and 12 and 15 years old to get their attention. That's what got your attention in that soapbox when you flew Neil's landing. I know this was a familiar scene to you. No doubt you've done it before. But we have to start now. We have to give these kids something. And aviation in space is the something. The aviation will always be there. There's always new airplanes. There's always the Blue Angels. There's always exciting things. But all of a sudden, some of these kids, and I know when you talk to them, there's an emptiness in they don't know where they're going to go. And Neil said it a minute ago. Do we have any use for the Neil Armstrongs in the space program today? Do we? No, I think we can send a lot of scientists and astronomers, and in all due respect, send some of your colleagues over to the Soviet Union, put them in a spacesuit, send them up to space, let them do their all-important research. But until we have the capability to get ourselves up there, we don't need the Neil Armstrongs of the world anymore. How important is Neil Armstrong to this country?
Well, I think we'll always need Captain Cernans and Neil Armstrongs and to be that model that everybody will strive to try to become someday. But so I appreciate those comments. And Dr. Griffin, I have to echo what Steve Palazzo said. You know, I'd much rather be a pilot on the ground wishing I was flying than flying and wishing I was on the ground. So, you know, it's very important that we do a lot of these test models on the ground. I highly support that. So I can only echo that. I'm going a little bit over time here, but I truly believe that there's a kid in a refrigerator box somewhere that's dreaming of deep space, and that's who we need to get to. And those are the engineers to build that program, to build that deep space vehicle as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate all you've done for this great country of ours, and I yield back, sir.
The gentleman yield back. He used exactly 5 minutes. Only one today. Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Benishek, the gentleman from Michigan. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say what a pleasure it is for me to be here and listen to your testimony. It's been an inspiration to me. I remember where I was that day as well. But and I don't really want to go over the stuff that we already talked about. I'm kind of curious about the nuclear propulsion thing that you mentioned there before, Dr. Griffin. Do we have that kind of research ongoing at this time?
No.
All right.
I can say no in more ways if you like, but no.
Well, I mean, I'm concerned about our budget and unnecessary expense, but I do see, you know, the educational problems with not doing this and maintaining the top edge of technology for peaceful methods and for defensive reasons as well. Did you have
this is to the point of my comment in my oral statement when I said, do we want to have a real space program or not? When you have grand goals that are very difficult to reach, it unifies and mandates all of these separate pieces: crew vehicles, life support, radiation tolerance, nuclear propulsion, atmospheric entry technologies at high speed, greater producibility and manufacturability, higher reliability, higher standards of manufacturing. All of these and many, many more things, the need for scientific investigation, all of these are pulled together by the pursuit of a goal which is out of your reach. And that's, to me, what a real space program does.
Anyone else have a comment they'd like to make? Captain Cernan?
Are you Czech?
Yes, sir.
Jak se máš?
Thank you. I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back, and for the very patient Mr. Posey, I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing me, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this important discussion. The topic of this hearing, the future of human spaceflight, is critically important to my constituents, and of course it's an honor to be here with our esteemed guest heroes today. My first real job was at Pad 17, as was our first panelist, and Dr. Zuber, I'm glad you got to be at Pad 17, which is there no longer. As a young man, I got to work on the rocket ship that took you to the moon, Mr. Armstrong, and brought you safely back, the third stage of Douglas subcontractor. And unfortunately, Mr. Cernan, I was laid off before it was your turn to fly. And me and a couple dozen thousand of our best friends. But the future of spaceflight, human spaceflight, is critically important to the Space Coast that I represent. The economy, of course, is all politics being local, is inextricably entwined with our space program. The retirement of the shuttle program was a major blow, obviously, to the district. Mine and Representative Adams, who has the adjoining district, and we share the space centers. I was encouraged by the promise of the commercial crew, and I think it's our greatest near-term hope for returning our astronauts to low Earth orbit and the International Space Station. Commercial crew, however, is both a needed commercial capacity and a NASA-led exploration capacity needed in order to retain our standing as the world's greatest seafaring nation, and also to remain our dominance of the ultimate military high ground, which is space. Space to us is what Golan Heights is to Israel. And it's ironic, space and Israel are the two subjects I've found here in Congress since I've been here that are absolutely nonpartisan, where there are no party lines, even blurred. They're in step on both sides, thank goodness. After a contentious summer, including the first ever congressional subpoenas in NASA's history, NASA at long last revealed their initial plans for space launch system that will carry the Orion capsule on the future exploration missions. While many of us welcome that announcement, the administration has still not set out an adequate vision. And I intended, except you've made yourself so very clear, all of you in prior testimony, to get your positions on the necessity of us returning to the moon. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, all of you have been very explicit in thinking that is a necessary step for this nation. Am I correct? You're all shaking your head, yes. Thank you very much. I've got more questions than I'm going to have time to ask, but I'm going to start with one that I'm really curious about with Dr. Griffin. Current NASA plans seem to suggest that the use of orbital fuel depots to enable exploration missions into deep space. What are your views? Is this a practical approach as a substitute for heavy launch vehicles, do you think?
Well, the short answer is no, but this time let me expand on that just a little bit. I think it certainly requires more study, but I think the onus is on those who want to advocate this approach to show that it makes sense, because first of all, it flies in the face of experience across all other transportation sectors that humans have yet built. The conventional wisdom is reflected in things like mile-long railroad trains. We don't send 2 or 3 cars. We have huge containerized shipping platforms. We try not to send small boats. We use supertankers, not, again, small boats. The air transport industry uses commuter jets for short-haul transportation, but if you're going coast to coast or intercontinentally, we are gravitating towards 787s and Airbus 380s. Either everyone else is wrong, or space transportation is somehow different, or depots just don't make sense. So I'm in the camp that says, so far I haven't seen the argument from an engineer's point of view that they make sense. Earth orbit is short-haul transportation, so therefore we need smaller rockets appropriately sized to the crew vehicles we want to do. That's the 25 or so metric ton class Ares 1, or an equivalent, right, because Ares 1 was canceled. If you want to go to the moon or beyond, well, that's a long trip. That's a big trip. The depot advocates will say, well, 70% of what you need is fuel. Well, okay, but 30% is not. 30% is really big hardware, and so that is most easily accomplished by using a heavy lift launch vehicle. Well, once you have it, once you own a heavy lifter, just as once you own a supertanker or once you own a Boeing 787, well, then the economies of operation of those devices call upon you to use them as often as possible. As Mr. Armstrong pointed out earlier, all transportation devices have economies of scale. Generally, the bigger that you can build them, the lower your overhead. So no, I am not yet convinced, strictly as an engineer, I'm not convinced at all that the lowest cost approach to deep space exploration has fuel depots as its answer. I just don't see it. I wish it did, because obviously that would make the problem much easier. So I wish it did. I just don't think it does. And I'm primarily concerned that advocates of fuel depots are trying to answer the question of what kind of human space exploration is most suited to commercial space, rather than asking the question, how can commercial space best enable human exploration?
Correct. Mr. Chairman, can I get one little follow-up?
Without objection, we have a little.
Just address some comments. I love commercial space. Roots on the Thor before it was even the Delta, where yours were. And we need commercial space, but I'm a little bit chagrined when people say that commercial space is such a threat, or manned spaceflight, human spaceflight is such a threat to commercial. As I recall, there's never been a NASA mechanic or electrician that's assembled into these rockets yet. I remember going back to your Apollo rockets. We had Boeing in the first stage, Lockheed in the second stage, Douglas in the third stage. IBM was the instrumentation unit, Grumman was the payload. I mean, I think those are all commercial activities, and I think they spawn commercial growth of other activities. And so, just quick nod of the head, agreement, disagreement?
But it had NASA insight and oversight, which commercial space today, to my knowledge, does not have.
And should have.
Well, sir, if I might add, if the development is being done with public funds, then I think it is only correct to have oversight of government agencies into those developments. If a development is being carried out on private funds, and then the product or the service is offered to the market for whatever the traffic will bear, then I would pat them on the back and say, good on them. But if public funds are going to be involved in the development, then there has to be public oversight to ensure proper responsibility and accountability for those funds.
Gentleman's time has expired, and the question's completed, and I thank the witnesses for their very valuable testimony. And tell you that the members of the committee may have additional questions. If they are, they'll submit them to you in writing. And I want to ask Mrs. Cronmiller to express our thanks to Mike McCulley, too, for his long years of service in the United Space Alliance, USA. Gentlemen, we will ask you all to answer those questions in writing, and the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments from members. And thank you, Mrs. Johnson, for your input. Thank all of you good witnesses, Dr. Zuber and these three gentlemen. This is the best hearing I've ever presided over. Thank all of you for your good work, and God bless you, every one of you. We are adjourned.